The clinking of glasses faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I could focus on was the man speaking into the microphone, my groom, Captain Mark Jansen. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the reception hall with the chilling precision of a command. "Impossible?" he asked, his eyes locked on my father. The laughter from my father's table died instantly. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the room. Mark's face was a mask of cold, disciplined fury. "Sir, with all due respect." Every single decorated operator in this room marches behind her. I watched my father's face. The proud, boastful smile froze, then slowly collapsed as confusion gave way to a dawning, sickening shock. He looked small. Just an hour before, he had been a giant in his own mind. I was speaking quietly with my mentor, General Miller, a man whose quiet authority could command entire armies. He was one of the few people who saw my potential when no one else in my family would. We were discussing a recent geopolitical shift when my father, Sergeant Major Jensen, a man forever defined by a war that ended decades ago, swaggered over. He clapped the general on the back with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. "General," he boomed. "Good to see some real warriors here, not just these new-age computer jockeys." He shot a wink at me, a gesture dripping with the same condescension I'd felt my entire life. "My daughter here, she plays with computers for the army. Good, safe work." I held my breath, the familiar heat of shame rising in my chest. It was the same dismissal I got when I graduated top of my class, the same tone he used when I got my commission, a pat on the head for a child's hobby. He turned back to the general, his voice full of bluff confidence. "Can you believe it, sir? They talk about women leading troops. It's impossible. A recipe for disaster." I saw the change in General Miller's eyes. They went from polite interest to something cold, something analytical. He looked at my father, and then his gaze shifted to me, holding a silent, profound question. In that moment, the insult wasn't personal anymore, it was procedural. It was a breach of protocol so profound, so ignorant, that it demanded a correction. This wasn't just my father being himself, this was a retired NCO publicly disrespecting the very structure he claimed to worship, all while dismissing a senior officer standing right in front of him. The anger that rose in me was cold and sharp. It wasn't the anger of a slighted daughter. It was the fury of a commander whose authority had been publicly challenged. He chuckled, thinking he was just sharing an old-school opinion with a fellow veteran. He had no idea he had just dismissed the operational commander of Joint Task Force Chimera in front of the head of Strategic Command, to understand the reckoning that was about to be served with the champagne. You have to understand the two lives I was forced to live. To live two lives is a strange and exhausting thing. In one, you are a ghost, a footnote in your own family's story. In the other, you are the one who makes the decisions that determine who lives and who dies. For years, I balanced on that knife's edge, keeping the two worlds so far apart that they could never touch. One was the world they gave me, and the other was the one I had built for myself in the shadows they never bothered to look into. The difference between them was never clearer than at a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years before my wedding. The table was groaning with food, but the air was thick with expectation. My father, Sergeant Major Rhett Jensen, a man whose spine seemed permanently fused into the position of parade rest, sat at the head of the table. His entire identity was forged in the crucible of the 1990s infantry, and he saw the modern world, including his own daughter, as soft and undisciplined. Opposite him was my brother, David, the family's undisputed golden boy, who wore his easy charm like a suit of armor. He had just been promoted to assistant manager of the lumber department at a regional hardware chain, and to hear my father tell it, you'd think he'd just taken a hill single-handedly. "That's my boy," my father beamed, raising his glass. "Climbing the ladder, showing initiative. That's what it takes to be a leader of men." The family all murmured their approval, and David soaked it in with a humble nod that he'd perfected over years of practice. I saw the whole history of our family in that moment. I saw the brand new bike he got for a good report card the same year. I had to save for months to replace my broken graphing calculator. I saw the down payment they happily gave him for his condo, which came just after they'd told me money was too tight to help with my student loans. It was always the same story, just a different chapter. Later, during a lull in the conversation, I decided to try. Just once more. I actually have some good news too, I said quietly. I've been selected to lead a new special projects unit. It's a big step up in responsibility. My father turned to me, his expression one of polite, disengaged patience. He reached over and gave my hand a few gentle pats, the kind you give a child who has just shown you a drawing of a lopsided house. "That's nice, honey," he said, his voice laced with that familiar weary condescension. "More paperwork, I bet." He then leaned back, his duty done. "You just make sure you find a nice strong man to take care of you, Private Annie." Private Annie. That's who I was in that world. A perpetual private. A child playing dress-up in a uniform he could never truly comprehend. A name meant to remind me of my place. But in my other world, I had a different name. The scene shifts not just in place, but in reality. Gone is the warm, cloying atmosphere of the dining room. Here, there is only the cold, sterile air of a skiff, a sensitive, compartmented information facility. It's a place with no windows, where the only light comes from the cold blue, white glow of 24 monitors displaying a river of encrypted data. This room is the nerve center, the brain, and in this room I am not Private Annie. Here, I am Valkyrie. My team was in the field, deep in hostile territory, and their lives depended entirely on the information I could feed them and the decisions I made based on it. A hushed, urgent voice crackled in my earpiece. My lead intelligence analyst. "Valkyrie, we have a new SIGINT hit. Chatter indicates their primary target is moving. He's not at the objective we planned for." My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, steady rhythm. On the main screen, I had a drone feed showing my team's convoy of low-profile vehicles moving through a dark, narrow street. They were walking into a trap. There was no time for committee debate or second-guessing. There was only the data, the mission, and the lives of my people. "Chimera -1, this is Valkyrie," I said, my voice calm and even, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "Abort Objective Alpha. We have a new SIGINT hit. They're moving the asset, rerouting your TTPs to Objective Bravo. Acknowledge?" A moment of static-filled silence stretched for an eternity. Then, a calm, steady voice came back. "Solid copy, Valkyrie. We're moving." That voice belonged to Captain Mark Jansen, my fiancé. In that world, he wasn't my protector or my keeper. He was my lead operator, a seasoned Green Beret who trusted my judgment with his life and the lives of his men, without question, without hesitation. My computer job was the unseen hand guiding a surgeon's scalpel through the dark. I tried to explain the frustration to my mother, a woman who treated my father's ego like an unexploded bomb that had to be constantly and carefully navigated. In a phone call after that Thanksgiving, I let a little of the wall down. I told her how it felt to be so thoroughly dismissed. She just sighed, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. "Oh, Anna, you know how he is," she said, her voice full of a tired resignation that infuriated me. "His service was everything to him. He just doesn't understand your world, your computer work. It's just easier to let him think what he wants. It's just easier." Those 3 words were the story of my childhood. It was easier to praise David than to understand my complex academic interests. It was easier to let my father's loud opinions fill every room than to challenge him. For her, peace was the absence of conflict. For me, that peace had become a suffocating silence, a void where recognition and respect should have been. I was utterly alone in my own family. For years I let him think what he wanted. I kept my 2 worlds separate out of a misguided sense of duty to his pride. But when he chose my wedding to broadcast his disrespect, he broke OPSEC. He compromised the mission of building my own life. And in my world, there are consequences for that. After that phone call with my mother, something inside me finally clicked into place. The years of quiet frustration, of biting my tongue at family dinners, solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about seeking an apology or finally getting him to understand my feelings. That was a battle I had long ago accepted I would lose. This was about correcting a factual error. My father operated in a world of rigid hierarchies and undeniable truths. So, I decided I would finally give him one. I looked at Mark one evening, the wedding plans spread out on our table. He doesn't respect my words, I stated, not with anger, but with the flat certainty of an intelligence assessment. He doesn't respect my achievements, but he worships the chain of command. So, we'll give him the chain of command. From that moment on, the wedding ceased to be a personal event. It became an operation. I applied the same methodical precision to the guest list that I would to a mission roster. It wasn't about who we wanted there, it was about who Dow needed to be there to bear witness. I sent a formal embossed invitation not to General Miller's home, but through official channels to his office at the Pentagon. It wasn't a request for a friend, but a formal invitation to a subordinate officer's ceremony. Then came my unit, the Green Berets, PSYOP specialists, and intelligence analysts who knew me only as Valkyrie. I coordinated their travel and accommodations with logistical precision, ensuring a full contingent would be present. The seating chart was my tactical map. I spent hours arranging it, not for conversation or comfort, but for impact. My father's table was placed directly in the center of the room, a place of honor he would assume was his by right. But it was also a place with no cover, completely exposed. From that vantage point he would have a perfect unobstructed view of the head table where General Miller would be seated. His cronies, a collection of retired veterans from his era, would surround him, creating an echo chamber for his pride right before it was dismantled. Every element was a carefully placed domino, ready to be toppled. The final piece of the plan was the most critical, the trigger. I talked it over with Mark, laying out the strategy. If I say something, I'm just being an emotional daughter. It's what he expects. Mark listened, his expression serious. He understood this wasn't about marital drama, it was about protocol. But if you say it, I continued, a captain, one of the operators he idolizes, speaking to the rank, not the person. That's an irrefutable fact. It's a public acknowledgement of the command structure. He didn't hesitate. He reached across the table and took my hand, his gaze unwavering. He looked at me not just as his fiancé, but as his commander. It will be my honor, Major. My father saw a wedding invitation. I saw a summons. He thought he was walking into a party to celebrate his daughter getting married. He had no idea he was walking, by my design, into a formal military review of his own conduct. The reception hall was a study in contrasts, a room divided by an invisible line. On one side was my father's world, a loud, sprawling collection of his friends and our extended family. They were laughing, telling stories with wide gestures, completely oblivious to the dynamics at play. On the other side of the room, seated at tables I had strategically arranged, was my world. It was quiet, composed of the men and women of my unit, their spines straight, their eyes missing nothing. They were in their immaculate dress uniforms, a sea of disciplined calm in the boisterous civilian ocean. They didn't mingle much. They watched, they observed, they waited. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the feeling of a carefully set operation just moments from initiation. Then, as planned, my father took the bait. Flushed with wine and an overinflated sense of his own importance, he grabbed the microphone for an unscheduled toast. He began with a long, meandering story about his own time in the service, a story everyone had heard a dozen times. He then turned his attention to Mark. "Welcome to the family, son," he slurred slightly, patting his own chest. "Glad my little girl finally found a real soldier to keep her safe." I felt Mark's hand tighten on mine under the table, a small, reassuring pressure. My father, basking in what he perceived as the adoring spotlight, puffed out his chest and scanned the crowd. He was about to deliver the final, fatal blow to his own authority. "A woman leading troops?" he boasted, his voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. "Impossible." His table, my uncle's, and his VFW buddies erupted in sycophantic laughter. "It's a man's world," he declared, raising his glass. "Always has been, always will be." On the other side of the room, the laughter was met with a sudden, deafening silence. Every member of my team stopped talking. Every fork was set down. At the head table, I saw General Miller, who had been observing with a neutral expression. slowly and deliberately set his crystal glass down on the white linen. The soft, distinct click was the only sound from his side of the table. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. Before the echoes of my father's voice had even faded, Mark was on his feet. He moved with a calm, fluid grace, taking the microphone from the stand. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, forcing every eye in the room to turn to him. "Thank you for that toast, sir," he said, his voice level and clear, devoid of emotion but carrying immense weight. He looked directly at my father, who was still smiling, oblivious. "You mentioned it's impossible for a woman to lead troops." Mark paused again, letting the words hang in the air like an indictment. He then turned slightly, gesturing with an open hand toward the tables of uniformed soldiers. "Impossible?" Mark's voice was like steel. "Every man you see here marches behind her. I march behind her." He turned his gaze back to my father, whose smile had now frozen on his face. "She is Major Anna Petrova, our commander." Then came the final devastating reveal. "To us, she's known as Valkyrie." A stunned, absolute silence gripped the hall. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, at a table near the front, a single green beret, a man with more combat experience than my father had years of service, pushed his chair back. The sound scraped loudly in the quiet room. He rose to his feet, not looking at anyone but me, and stood at perfect rigid attention. A second later, his entire table followed suit. Then, like a wave breaking in slow motion, another table rose. And another. In less than 5 seconds, every single service member in the room was standing. Their bodies locked at attention, their eyes fixed on me at the head table. The room was a sea of dress uniforms, a silent, powerful testament to a truth my father had refused to see. Lastly, General Miller pushed back his own chair and rose. He didn't stand at attention. Instead, he turned to face me directly and gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound respect from a 4-star general to a field-grade officer. It was then that I finally looked at my father. His face was ashen, the color completely drained from it. He was frozen, his mouth slightly agape, staring at the men he idolized, the elite of the United States, military, paying silent, unwavering tribute not to him, but to the daughter he had just publicly mocked. He was, in that moment, publicly and unequivocally outranked, and there was nothing he could do but stand there and witness it. My father had spent my entire life teaching me the importance of rank. In the end, it only took 6 words for him to finally learn who outranked who. The silence that followed the standing tribute was a living thing. It filled every corner of the reception hall, and in it, a fundamental shift occurred. The center of gravity in the room had moved. My father, who had been holding court just minutes before, seemed to shrink. He and his table of friends became a lonely, silent island in the middle of a room that was now orbiting a different sun. No one approached them. No one made eye contact. They were simply irrelevant. The rest of the night was a warm, overwhelming blur of genuine connection. My team, my operators, the men and women I led, approached me and Mark all evening. Their handshakes were firmer, their congratulations imbued with a new layer of meaning. They weren't just congratulating me on my marriage. They were acknowledging a victory on a different kind of battlefield. One of them, a grizzled master sergeant who had seen everything, just clasped my shoulder and gave me a single respectful nod. "That was a hell of an operation, Valkyrie," he murmured. In that moment I realized my 2 worlds had not just collided. One had completely consumed the other. The carefully constructed narrative my father had built around me, the identity of Private Annie, had been declassified and disproven by irrefutable evidence. I didn't speak to him for the rest of the night. I didn't need to. He had made his statement, and the room had given its verdict. There was nothing left to say. 6 months passed. The memory of the wedding faded from a sharp, tactical victory into a quiet, foundational peace. I stood in my dress uniform, my posture straight, my hands clasped behind my back. Before me sat the promotion board. The questions were rigorous, the scrutiny intense, but I felt a calm I had never known before. I was no longer divided. I was simply myself, whole and complete. When the results were posted, I felt a quiet, profound sense of rightness. Later, at the formal ceremony, General Miller himself was the one to replace the gold, oak leaves of a major on my shoulders with the silver leaves of a lieutenant colonel. He leaned in close, his voice low. "You earned this, Colonel," he said. "In more ways than one." After he stepped back, Mark approached me. He didn't kiss me. He didn't hug me. In front of everyone, he snapped to attention and rendered a perfect, crisp salute to his new superior officer. A proud, unwavering smile was on his face. It was the greatest expression of love he could have possibly given me. That evening, there was no big family party. No awkward dinner with my parents. The celebration was a small private gathering in the back room of a quiet bar near the base. It was just me, Mark, and my team, my true family. They were loud and laughing, swapping stories, the easy camaraderie forged in shared risk and mutual respect. Midway through the night, the master sergeant who had spoken to me at the wedding stood up and cleared his throat. He presented me with a simple, dark wood plaque. Engraved on the brass plate were not my name or my new rank, but a single word: Valkyrie. I held it in my hands, the weight of it feeling more real and more earned than any trophy my father had ever displayed on his mantle. This was a legacy built not on a name I was given, but on a name I had earned. This was a family I had chosen, and one that had chosen me back, not for my potential, or for who they wanted me to be, but for the commander I already was. A few weeks later, I was in my new, larger office, going over logistical plans for an upcoming deployment. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from an unknown number. I picked it up. The message was short, stilted. "Heard about the promotion. Congrats, Colonel. Your mother is very proud." It was from my father. The use of my rank was so formal, so awkward. It was the only language he had left, the only framework through which he could now try to understand me. I read the words and I felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication, not even pity. It was like reading a dispatch from a distant, forgotten outpost. I held my thumb over the screen for a moment, then simply archived the conversation. I placed the phone back down, my focus already returning to the large tactical map on my screen. The mission was waiting. My father believed a legacy was something you inherit. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence and have acknowledged in public. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.